welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most interesting topics in the world of Indiana basketball. This is our 167th edition of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 618th overall episode of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, April 30th, 2020. I am your host this week, Galen Claudio. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment.
And Indiana is the national champion.
When it comes down, Indiana will be champion.
Smart takes the shot.
The Hoosiers have won the national championship.
And this week's banner moment really couldn't be anything else than the revelation that freshman sensation Trayce Jackson-Davis is guaranteed to be in Bloomington for his sophomore year. As you all know, college basketball players are given a certain period of time to announce their intentions to either declare for the NBA draft or at the very least announce their intentions to explore the waters of the NBA by getting feedback on their draft stock from the teams in the association. Few would have been surprised to see Trayce at least test those waters, given how impressive his freshman year was. After all, Trayce finished in the top 100 most efficient scorers in the nation last year with shooting percentages and rebound rates that scream potential and physical gifts. But no, Jackson-Davis is coming back, not testing the waters. And his message via Twitter to IU fans was direct and exciting and inspiring. Unfinished business, the tweet said. And that's a galvanizing piece of news for an IU fan base that's been looking for a reason to get excited about the near-term future of Indiana basketball. Sure, it's almost certain that TJD was going to return regardless. There's some obvious areas of improvement he needs to make in his game if he wants to compete at the NBA level. But this announcement is about more than that. It's about his desire to come back to Assembly Hall, his desire to play for this program, his desire to do something memorable in an Indiana uniform. There were a lot of predictions in the darkest moments of this past season about how Trayce might leave town at the first opportunity. Well, that opportunity came and it went. And not only is he still here, he's ready to do something special. That right there, that's a banner moment for this program. All right, now it's time for me to introduce my esteemed co-host for this week's show, which for one of the only times in Assembly Call history will not feature any of the regular Assembly Call hosts that you have come to know and occasionally tolerate. Jerod, Andy, Ryan, and Coach are all off this week because we're doing a show swap. This is exciting news, and we're actually, tomorrow, you're going to hear Andy and Coach doing an episode of CrimsonCast while Scott Caulfield and I take over the mics here at the Assembly Call. And since neither Scott nor I have custom theme music to play, we'll just skip over the cheeky introductions and get right to Scott's opening thoughts. So, Scott, welcome to the Assembly Call officially. What are your general feelings about not just this last week in IU basketball, but the offseason as a whole so far?
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you guys for having us. First time, long time, and all of that. I will jump right into the Trayce Jackson-Davis. It's great news. I mean, I think that was the thought when we saw him having a great year it was kind of like Romeo the year before. I mean, Romeo was fantastic. Everything kind of ran through him. And I think through the middle of the year, we all kind of realized, okay, this is one and done. And I think it's exciting to know that he's back. I love the unfinished business. We'll see where that goes. We can definitely dig into that. But no, I mean, I think this is a really good piece of news. And it's a great way to start an off season that has been very odd for obvious reasons. There's definitely unfinished business for a lot of reasons. But it's good. And you can't help, but you do have to wonder, and I'll just wonder for a second, did this have anything to do with the fact that basically I'm not sure anybody even knows when there'll be a draft, if there'll be a draft, like when that's going to happen. Like, honestly, probably the safest bet if you're a guy who's probably on the border of the lottery is just saying, I'm going to come back because who knows when eligibility is going to be reopening. Like, there's so many question marks. The easier thing to say, I'm just going to come back for one more year because I can make my draft stock better anyway.
Yeah, we'll dig into that a lot more throughout the course of this broadcast, and hopefully folks will stick around for the entire show. as we're going to go in to talk about that. And let me just give you a kind of a sense overall of what we're going to be talking about throughout this show. So first of all, we'll hit our Hoosier headlines. We're going to talk a lot about how this Trayce Jackson-Davis return, like what that means for IU and what it means in a historical context, because there have been some players that have leapt from Indiana after their freshman year who were very good their freshman year. There's others that have stayed. We want to take a look at what that pattern has meant historically and what we might expect moving forward. And then we've got your questions queued up. Jerod was very nice. He solicited the community of Assembly Call to ask us some questions, and we're looking forward to fielding those. So all of that coming up this week on Assembly Call Radio. But first, before we get to all of that, a few quick announcements. First of all, we wanted to ask you all to please continue to support our friends at Home Field Apparel. You all know Home Field Apparel if you've listened to this show. They are the official suppliers of a lot of Hoosier Nation right now. I live here in Bloomington. You walk down the streets and you see probably every fourth person, maybe every third person wearing Home Field Apparel gear. I'm wearing my oatmeal script hoodie right now. I feel comfortable in it. It's been a nice buffet against the winds down here today. So if you go to Home Field Apparel and you use the code Assembly20, you get a really nice discount on your first order. So be sure to head over to Home Field Apparel and do that at your earliest convenience. Get yourself some quality IU swag. Also, as you all know, as we continue to deal with this situation related to COVID-19, we continue to deal with economic uncertainty. There's a lot of people out there in need. There's a lot of people out there who could use your help if you are in a position to give that help. So if you'd like to support a local food bank, because really, when we talk about the base level of needs out there, having enough to eat, and making sure that you're not dealing with food insecurity in your household, that's really what's on a lot of people's minds right now. So check out www.foodpantries.org. That's www.foodpantries.org. Or check out www.feedingamerica.org. Again, www.feedingamerica.org. If you're in a position to help out, please do so. There's families out there all across the state of Indiana and all across the nation that would really appreciate the help. So we appreciate you thinking about doing that. All right, let's go ahead and move forward. We'll hit some Hoosier headlines. We've got Trayce Jackson-Davis returning. Let's start with that one. Scott, you talked about this a little bit earlier on, and it's one of those situations I think that you kind of touched on it a little bit to start with. The idea that would this have been the decision if we had any sort of clarity as far as whether a draft was going to be taking place, what the NBA was going to be doing with their overall offseason format, any of that. And right now there's a lot of uncertainty as far as where all that's going. You could look at it that way. And for once, I feel like you're playing the pessimistic one here. I think that's a reading that you could go into it with, but I think you could also go into it and say, look, Trayce Jackson-Davis obviously knows he's got some stuff to work on with his game if he wants to play at the professional level. And he's shown a tremendous amount of physical gifts and overall basketball skills in this rookie year, this freshman year with IU basketball. But he knows what he's got to work on largely. It's to some degree, it almost feels like the feedback he would have gotten, he was going to know what that feedback was regardless. But to come out with that unfinished business moniker on the Twitter feed, that really does make you feel to some degree like it's more than just the NBA draft not happening. It feels like there's an investment on Trayce Jackson-Davis as part of being here as part of the Bloomington community. And that, if you choose to interpret it that way, and I can see by the look on your face, maybe not, this seems like a positive thing. It's something that what the actual details of it are, you can kind of leave to the side. This is something that IU fans can get excited about.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be the pessimist on this, but, I would say, like, what else is he going to tweet? He's going to tweet like, hey, man, like, probably not going to go in the first round. I guess I'll come back for one more year, get my fake ID ready for Knicks. You're going to say something like unfinished business, like got to keep going for it, let's come back and throw the sixth banner up there. I mean, you're going to say that. So it's great. I mean, it's not bad to hear it, but it's also like it kind of rings a little bit like, what is the unfinished business? Like, are we going to try and get in the top 5 of the Big Ten? We're going to try and not play on Thursday in the Big Ten tournament. Like, so what is, it's not like this is a team that, went to the Final Four and, well, there was no Final Four, but But so but I don't want to belabor that point. Right. I do think, when you saw Jackson-Davis, I think you did see a guy. And by the way, we are both very open. Like, if a guy should go, he should go. It's funny thinking of the rewatches, like thinking up, watching Shaq and Bill Walton being like, he should stay another year. Like, we are not in that boat. But Davis kind of felt like a tweener to me. Like, it looked like he really could use one more year of seasoning. Like, he doesn't have a ton of outside shooting. I don't think he took a 3-point shot all year. And if you're going to be in the NBA at the size he's at, you're going to have to 6'9". You can't just play in the post. You're going to have to be a stretch. And so, he probably needs to show that he can handle the ball more, shoot outside more. So I think there's definitely parts of his game that could use a little bit of grooming, and just the ability to kind of take over games and really demand, there were times where he wasn't getting the ball, and that might be because of some players who are not there anymore, but it's also, he wasn't always posting up in a spot where he was able to get it. So he's, I think those are things that you saw. I think we all kind of saw it with our eyes. Like, he's a fantastic player, but definitely felt like a guy who one more year is not, it's not just saying that because I want him one more year. Like, I think there's a lot of his game that could help his draft stock for next year.
Well, I think part of it might be when you talk about the unfinished business tweet. Look, this was a team that was in transition this year, and there were some things to be critical about in the way that they played on a game-to-game basis. But there was a gradual upward trajectory, and I think the floor of this season was certainly higher than the floor of the previous season in terms of what the overall expectations were. This team was going to go to the NCAA tournament. They were probably going to be a single-digit seed, maybe a 9 seed, but still, that's a significant improvement over what you had last year. To me, that's the unfinished business. It's this idea that this is an IU team that when Trayce Jackson-Davis committed, like the team he committed to didn't make the NCAA tournament. His freshman year team was going to make the NCAA tournament, and let's just go ahead and put that in the bank that this was an NCAA tournament year. The next step is bringing IU back to a level on the national scene where you look at them and say, that's a program we need to keep an eye on. That's a program that you need to watch out for. Maybe not, certainly not a championship contending team quite yet, but a team that could solidly be in the conversation for a 4, 5, 6, 7 seed, a team that's going to be in the top 25 of the majority of the year. That's the obvious next step. And that's what I'm really interested to see with Trayce Jackson-Davis coming back. One of his teammates did declare for the draft, didn't hire an agent. Second year in a row, Justin Smith is getting feedback from draft experts and people in the NBA. This is not surprising, and I am a firm believer that if you feel like you're close or you just want to get some professional feedback, you should absolutely take advantage of it. Some people kind of chortled about Justin Smith doing this, but I don't really see a problem with it. It's not binding. The whole purpose of having this process there in the first place is to help players out, to help understand what they need to work on. And for as much as Justin Smith got criticized last year for, not knowing, X, Y, or Z at certain times on the floor, he was, I think, a better player last year than he was the year before. And, the fact that he went and got some feedback on where he was at in terms of his professional stock probably had something to do with that.
Yeah, I'm never going to make fun of somebody for that. I mean, you're drafted on potential, and teams draft on potential, not so much what they see now. And there's no question, Justin Smith is one of the most potential-laden athletes, if that's even something, but it has the most potential of any athlete we've seen in a long time in an Indiana jersey. I mean, he's the most explosive guy. I mean, that block 2 years ago at Michigan State that basically won the game where he came up from behind. I mean, that was an insane play. And this is probably, I can understand the kind of the chortle thing. It's like, all right, hey, can you at least be a leading scorer on your team that barely makes a tournament? But it's like, okay, Ben Simmons was on a team that didn't make the tournament, and he was the number 1 pick. And it's like, this is going to be his professional career at some point. Justin Smith is going to play professional basketball. It may not be in the NBA, but he's going to get paid to play basketball for a while. And those are high-level professionals who can give him a lot of good information on what he needs to do to make his game better. So I think it's less that he thought he was going to go like first round top 15 and more just, hey, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to hear what some GMs tell me or some scouts tell me I need to do to get better to play at the next level.
Assuming Justin Smith does not keep his name in the draft, and I feel pretty confident in saying that's not going to happen, IU's roster is set now. We know what it's going to be for next year. We got some news last week that kind of the final piece of the puzzle was decided upon as Demezie Anderson announced that he was going to transfer from Indiana. And and that assumes, of course, as was pointed out, that Christian Lander reclassifies. We're still waiting on final word that that's going to happen. But Demezy Anderson, we were wondering, okay, where's he going to go? What's going to happen? Well, we just found out. I just saw the tweet from Caleb Kaufman on Twitter, and I don't know who had it first, but I'm going to give Caleb credit for breaking it because he's the first one that I saw that had it. But Demezy Anderson going to be transferring to a Missouri Valley school, heading to Loyola of Chicago. Of course, Loyola went to the Final Four a couple of years ago. That got the whole Sister Jean thing going up there. Seems like a pretty good fit. And, when you look at Demezy Anderson and you look at what his skill set is, it really did feel, with as much trouble as he had adapting to the Big Ten level, that if he were to drop down to that next level, which Missouri Valley, the Horizon League, the MAC, somewhere along those lines, that he might be able to find a place where he could get into games a lot more and have more of an impact. This seems like a really good move for him.
Yes, I would agree with all that. The thing that I wish him all the best. The thing that I don't want to see is another. We've had this situation the last 7 or 8 years previous where we've had no IU teams to watch in the NCAA tournament. Yet we're having to watch Maurice Creek and Hunter Perea and guys who kind of flew through our system suddenly doing well in the tournament. And by the way, more power to them. I wish them all luck, but it's I hope. I hope he does well there, and I hope we also have teams that we can enjoy too, because it's really tough these years where it's hey, all right, goodbye Demezy. Then it's tough 2 years later if we're out in the tournament and they're in the Sweet 16. You're okay, good time. So, but no, I agree with you. I mean, it was. His role was diminished. I don't think he played in the last 4 or 5 games. He had a great defensive stretch to start the season, but you kind of, I think he also saw too, there wasn't quite really a role for him. And going in, into your sophomore year, if you haven't defined some kind of role, it's probably not going to be defined. So it's probably best to move on.
Demezy got billed as a shooter. He really never got uncorked from outside. It's interesting going to Loyola. This past year, they did not put up that many three-pointers. They were 306th in point distribution when it came to threes. They shot the ball fairly well as a team. And you look at their roster, he's going to be coming in essentially, if he ends up redshirting this year, which I would assume that he would, with a bunch of players that will be seniors when he gets on the floor finally next year. So that'll be interesting to see how he fits in with that. But probably for the best, it was going to be really hard for him to find playing time on this roster either this year or really next year. Last thing to mention before we wrap up this first segment, kind of a first and really an interesting thing. I don't know if you got a chance to listen to any of this, but Archie Miller popping up on the Hoosier Hysterics podcast and having a pretty open and frank conversation about a bunch of different things. I'm about halfway through the interview myself. Scott, have you had a chance to listen to it at all?
I haven't listened to it, but it's the first time an IU coach has been a podcast. Didn't Tom Crean do one in a truck outside of in the parking lot outside of Panera at some point?
It was Party City, and he was no longer the coach at IU. So I don't know if that necessarily qualifies. But I would look. First of all, I enjoy all the Hoosier Hysterics interviews. I think they do an excellent job, and I would highly recommend
children's show
podcast. There we go. I've enjoyed listening to it. I think right now Archie's talking about what they're doing in terms of the break and how things are going overall with the overall setup with this, having to deal with Zoom and recruiting and what have you. So I recommend checking it out if you get a chance.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Archie. We appreciate it. All right. That'll wrap up this opening segment, but coming up, we're going to talk about Trayce Jackson-Davis coming back a little bit more. We're going to talk about the comparison to other second-year IU stars, what we might be able to expect. Plus, we'll have your questions coming up later on Assembly Call Radio.
Good job, guys.
Thanks.
Nice job.
We appreciate it.
That was good.
Thank you, boss.
That was good. Scott, you were loud though. Everybody was commenting on it in the chat.
I moved the mic back, and that's also just Scott.
Scott's mic is on the lowest setting.
He's
just excited.
A game control or something that you can adjust. I mean, goodness.
Final Four.
Oh my god, that's tremendous.
We'll move it back.
Well.
I'm just here for the middle stuff. That's all. Just here for the middle stuff.
Well,
I'll make myself sparse once it's time to.
It's good to, we appreciate Jerod for actually producing this for us.
Yes.
If I would have made the same decision if I had been faced with me producing the show.
Galen and I had a call. Was it last night or 2 nights ago? The plan was for you to do it, and 5 minutes in, we're like, "All right, look, I'll just be here. I'll do it."
He kind of nipped that in the bud. I don't blame him at all.
I realize how complicated this process is when I have to start teaching people how to actually do it.
It's because I use a PC, isn't it?
Well, that's an issue. it's all right.
Gosh. Anyway. It's good to see
all
you.
Like the old PC Mac commercial. Like, I'm a PC, right. I'm a Mac.
By the way,
Jerod looks more PC and Galen looks more Mac, so like the optics aren't right here.
What the hell are you trying to say?
That's kind of
you're no. Galen's got the long hair. Jared's very coiffed. Like you're looking
Jerod.
Good. All
right. The other way, yes, I did. Jen put. Everybody calls me Jerod now because of Jackson-Davis, so I did have to pull that out on its own.
Jerod. Jerod.
Oh my goodness.
That's
right. Tremendous.
Hi, this is Jawan Morgan. What's the only thing better than getting IU's first triple-double in 47 years? Celebrating it with friends afterwards. Join Jerod, Andy, Ryan, and Coach on the assembly call after every IU basketball game. Go Hoosiers.
And welcome back to the Assembly Call. You can find all of our content at our website, assemblycall.com. And if you ever want to join the hashtag chat mob during our unedited live broadcasts,
chat mobbers,
you just missed a tremendous Paw Patrol conversation, or watch the replays, see all the between segment banter, check them out on our YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/assembly call, all one word. I'm Galen Clavio. It's great to be talking to you folks, filling in on the host mic tonight as Scott Caulfield and I take over the Assembly Call while Coach and Andy take over CrimsonCast. So let's go ahead and dive into our main topic, and we're going to stick it with the Trayce Jackson-Davis topic. I think that this is certainly the biggest news that came out this week, and certainly the thing that's got the most implications moving forward. So, Scott, let's talk a little bit about some of the historical context of Trayce Jackson-Davis coming back and remaining in an IU uniform. We've seen certain players come here for a year, have monster seasons, and then leave. Obviously, Eric Gordon comes to mind. Noah Vonleh, that was an unfortunate season, certainly, but he was here for a year and then left. But we've also seen several other players that have really become known as Hoosier greats over time come back for at least one more season, sometimes more than that. And I thought it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about those types of players and what we might glean from their returns as we apply it to our thinking on Trayce Jackson-Davis moving forward. So what do you got for us?
Nothing. No, I'm just kidding. I've been working on this.
Oh no.
This hot potato. No, I was trying to figure out who's had a good first season. And so I came up with a couple list of names. Some people I had to throw out. So I went all the way back to Landon Turner. After Landon Turner's first year, he only scored 5 points a game. Davis was at like 13.5 this year. And I know we just had a big fight off air about points not mattering, even though it's what keeps score in basketball. But I went down to a couple other names I want to look at. Like, I think Alan Henderson is a really interesting comp. Alan Henderson, his first year, let me pull up his stats here. His first year, he had 11 points a game. Davis had 13. He went 11 and then went to 11 and then 17 and 25. So he moved his way up. But what was interesting is, for him, he only shot 2% lower from 2 points. He didn't take any threes like Jackson-Davis. They were both very low post oriented guys. Some other comps I came up with, I think Christian Watford is also very close to what you saw from Jackson-Davis. Watford on points went 12-16, 12-12. But, Watford actually had even more offensive let me get it up here, had more offensive possessions and more percentage of shots and percentage of possessions than Jackson did his first year. Watford's tailed off throughout his career. That's partially because the team around him got vastly different and better. But so those are some of the guys I looked at. I mean, I look a little bit DJ White, and then you look at Zeller. Zeller just doesn't quite compare. The rating of Davis was really good, but the percentage of possessions and his effective field goal shooting is nothing like what Zeller's was.
I think, Cody Zeller is an interesting case because Cody Zeller came in and was immediately the man. As a freshman, yes, there were certainly other people contributing. You had Jordan Hull shooting from outside. You had Christian Watford, who was established, had scored 16 points a game, like you mentioned, the year before. But Cody Zeller came in and took the most 2-point shots on the whole team by a pretty significant margin his freshman year. What was interesting about Cody Zeller coming back his sophomore year, and I don't think there was a huge amount of question that was going to happen, but he went from being a player that was a key part of IU's team and was a pretty good player nationally. If you look at the Ken Pom national player rankings, he came in 9th in the country his freshman year. He was 3rd in the country his sophomore year. Like, he became a tremendously complete player in almost every facet of things. It's what made him a lottery pick that next off season. When you think about some of the overall development that we've seen out of certain players, I think back to what happened with a guy like you mentioned earlier the idea of, okay, how do we square this concept of where people sit within the confines of IU and how they are at a particular point in time. A lot of it comes down to what's surrounding them. And I think the interesting thing about a lot of those players that you mentioned, Alan Henderson, he's a freshman on a team that goes to a Final Four. He's on a team that's arguably better in certain ways, certainly more experienced the next year. Christian Watford, his freshman year was not awesome, obviously, and neither was his sophomore year, but he made that statistical leap because somebody had to, and it kind of fell to him. When you look at this particular situation with Trayce Jackson-Davis, what I think is interesting is that he's already got some pretty good pieces around him that should have more room to breathe. You're going to have Rob Finnessy playing I think a bigger role as a playmaker next year, which is going to allow a more consistent connection, hopefully, to form with Trayce Jackson-Davis on the offensive end. You're going to have potentially a Christian Lander coming in and being able to add athleticism and court smarts that perhaps weren't there last year. That ends up positively affecting what Trayce Jackson-Davis is able to do on the floor. Sometimes, depending on how good the player is and what their relative strengths are, it can be a situation where it can.
Did we lose Galen?
I'm still here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Where's Galen? Okay. So Galen's frozen.
Okay, do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, let's keep going.
So I will pick up from what Galen was talking about. The thing that I find really interesting when you look at Jackson-Davis's numbers compared to, that's Watford up there, but when you look at him versus Cody Zeller, because Galen was just talking about Zeller becoming such a great player. What's interesting is some of the advanced stats, Zeller actually got a little bit worse his second year compared to his first year. He had a great second year as well, but his effective field goal shooting went down. His offensive rating went down. He did take more shots and had more effective field goals, but some of his numbers went down. When you look at Jackson-Davis's numbers, like his effective field goal shooting this year is 56%. That's what Cody Zeller was his sophomore year. His offensive rating, they were both at 119.8 for Davis, 0.4 for Zeller. They are basically statistically almost similar from Zeller's sophomore year to what Davis did his freshman year. So, that was one of the troubles that I had putting up some of these comps or trying to find comps is really, you look at, and again, as Galen mentioned, they're not perfect examples because what was working around them is not the same. But you look at Henderson's first year, DJ White's first year, Christian Watford's first year, the numbers and especially the tempo-free stats really don't do any justice. Like Jackson-Davis's first year blew them all away. The only person you can really compare him with is Zeller, and really it's Zeller's second year you have to look at.
Sorry about that, folks. Definitely some internet issues here that we weren't expecting, but we're back. So, ultimately, it is one of those deals where I think the key aspect of all of this is that what Trayce Jackson-Davis brought to the floor his freshman year is really exciting to watch. And this is a really interesting spot for IU basketball in that you've got a player who's really set for a breakout year his sophomore year, and a team that is set, I don't want to say to break out necessarily, but certainly a team that's in the right place to blossom. This is the time that you would expect under a coach like Archie Miller, who's been there for a fourth year, with the full bevy of recruits finally on board, and largely the recruits that weren't his to start with finally out of the system. You would expect this to be where what the program is going to be really starts to take hold. And so I think that's probably where the most excitement comes out of this. And it's why I think looking at some of the past examples can be intuitive, because you get the chance to look not just at the individual player, but what position they were in. What sort of surroundings did those players have in IU's history? And that's kind of what you get to see here. I think it's fun to watch that unfold and get a chance to apply a slightly different scenario and try to guess what's going to happen with it.
Yeah, I mean, what you don't want to see is, and again, it's very unique to the situation, but I also try to comp out like DJ White, and it's just, DJ had a great freshman year, kind of swooned his sophomore year, and then came on really well his junior and senior year. But that was, 04 to 08 was a pretty tumultuous time in IU basketball. We're not going to rehash that now, but that has to be brought in, based on that. But
let's talk a little bit from this perspective. When you think about Trayce Jackson-Davis and the idea of what the team looks like, since you know that Trayce Jackson-Davis is going to be out there, but you also know that the constitution of the lineup is going to be a little bit different. Like the idea of who's going to be playing and how they all fit together is going to be different now because of simply the fact that, you don't have Devontae Green, who played about half of the available minutes last year. You don't have Deron Davis. You don't have the same sort of things that were affecting the way that Archie Miller was putting players out on the floor. I mean, do you expect to see Trayce Jackson-Davis played the second most minutes of anybody on this IU roster last year. Justin Smith played the most. If you expect both of those guys to play the same level of minutes, how do you see the rest of the lineup and the rest of the roster kind of bending around that core two players, playing either at the 3 and the 4 or the 4 and the 5 or the 3 and the 5? Like there's a bunch of different potential combinations that you might see building around that particular pair of players.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting as we were talking about this, I was thinking that, two of the arguably best post players we've had in the last 10 to 15 years have been Zeller and Jackson-Davis. And yet the problem with Zeller and the problem we had this year with Jackson-Davis is everybody's like, we can't get him the ball, like get the ball inside more. We can't seem to get him the ball. And it's just interesting that seemed to happen. Two totally different coaching staffs, two totally different situations, but it's like, we may not be the best as a program getting the big man the ball, but that is, I think that's going to be an interesting thing to look at, because looking at Jackson-Davis's numbers in depth, he didn't take any 3-point shots. And again, if he's going to test the waters and look to play in the NBA, which he will at some point, I'll go back to what I said in the first segment. At 6'9", he's going to have some stretch playing. So I do wonder if this year, there were some times this season where it was tough for him to get the ball, tough for him to get position in the post, and he kind of just wasn't able to get in the flow of the offense. I wonder if there's going to be some situations where you just run a smaller lineup and maybe you have Jackson at the 5, and then it's like, all right, if he's not getting the ball in the post, we're going to bring him out on the wing, and he's going to start running some offense, outside the 3-point line. So I wonder if we'll see some of that. You saw Justin Smith do more of that this year than he has in previous years. And I wonder if Davis will bring some of that to his game, because if he can do that, it would make for an interesting offense where you could even play inside outside and get some, matchups where you have, an Al Durham playing a little lower post and maybe backing down a player who's got more size on.
Yeah. I think it's curious because if you look at Trayce Jackson-Davis's offensive game, it was the most efficient offensive game by far of any of the players on this roster. And what I mean by that is when he utilized a possession, it led to points at a higher level than anybody else on the roster. And some of the less,
even Joey Brunk.
And this thing, Joey Brunk was in the top 4 in efficiency. Like Joey Brunk averaged about a point per possession. But what IU really needs is a way to increase that level of efficiency. Now, part of that will probably come just from the matriculation of Devontae Green, who, look, Devontae Green, very similar to Verdell Jones in his relatively low efficiency numbers. Like for whatever you want to attribute that to, with Verdell Jones, a lot of it came down to the fact that he had the ball in his hands a bunch. And that itself led to, some turnovers. It led to him being stuck taking shots when perhaps he might not have wanted to. And I think with Devontae Green, he was very much a volume 3-pointer guy. He actually did a much better job with turnovers this year, but that still got overwhelmed sometimes by his desire to shoot the ball whenever he felt that he was open. And, shooters shoot, as they say. But with that out of
I just love the euphemism, very much a volume shooter guy. It's a great, that'd be a great tattoo. Just tattoo on the arm. Like, I'm very much a volume shooter guy.
Call it like it is. But with that out of the lineup, it's interesting because Trayce Jackson-Davis's usage rate is going to have to go up from the standpoint of he's going to have to take probably even a higher volume of shots than he took this year. The offense is going to have to flow through him a bit more, and the offense is going to have to be better in terms of how it forms itself around Trayce Jackson-Davis. This is where obviously Justin Smith, if he's going to play that much of a role in the overall offensive setup, if he's going to play as many minutes next year as he did this past year, he's going to play an important role in making sure that offense is flowing smoothly. Obviously, your guard play is important, but this is also where the question mark of somebody like a Jerome Hunter, you look at the way that Jerome Hunter played with Trayce Jackson-Davis on the floor down the stretch in this season. In the last 5 games that Indiana played, Jerome Hunter played, I think, something like 40% of available minutes. He was regularly on the floor in a lineup with Trayce Jackson-Davis, where Trayce Jackson-Davis was at the 4 and Joey Brunk was at the 5. And that was a really intriguing lineup with when you think about if you got Rob Finney out there, if you've got Al Durham out there, and then you've got Hunter, Jackson-Davis, and Brunk, that's a different look than you get necessarily with a guy like Justin Smith out there with Trayce Jackson-Davis. And then I'm just really fascinated by this because having Jackson-Davis back allows you to play a lot more chess with the lineup. So we talked about that as a possibility coming into this past year, but it took a long time for Race Thompson to really get going on the season. Rob Finney was injured. There were a lot of things that happened with the roster that ended up being less than ideal that never really allowed IU until the end of the season to start hitting on a roster configuration that really worked the way that a lot of people hoped that it would. So anyway.
And the last thing I would say is that, the thing that would open all of this up, and we can discuss in a different podcast at some point, we'll just keep taking over Assembly Call. We'll do it next week. But the one thing that's going to immensely help out Jackson-Davis is if this team can get some steady and consistent 3-point shooting that doesn't come in bunches and the volume shooting tat on the arm. But if Finney can stay healthy and become a consistent 3-point shooter, if Hunter can continue doing what he showed down the stretch, if some of the freshmen come in and shoot, if Al Durham can get a shot, if you could have 2 or 3 or 4, 3 threats out there from 3 every single time, that's going to really make teams unable to kind of jump down and double team on Jackson-Davis and really make him even more unstoppable down low. Like it really would then open up some inside-outside game. Like it's amazing to think that Jackson-Davis did what he was able to do with really such an anemic 3-point shooting team this year.
Yeah, and I mean, you got Anthony Leal coming in. You've got these freshmen who bring all this different blend of shooting or athleticism or whatever else that they can bring to the lineup. And it's hard to say who's going to end up actually being able to get the minutes. And I think that ultimately, when you've got Trayce Jackson-Davis at the core of it all, that gives you an anchor point around which things can rotate. And that's probably the most exciting thing about all of this. So anyway, I think we've probably talked about as much about the Trayce Jackson-Davis aspect as we can. So we'll go ahead and move forward here. Coming up in our third segment, we're going to be answering your questions. We're going to talk a little bit about NBA draft feedback. We're going to talk about some of the other items related to coming to IU games. So stick with us. We'll be right back after that.
Ethan Happ, and I never listen to the assembly call, especially the episodes that Ryan is on.
We really made Ethan Happ's day today, I think. So he's certainly listening maybe now. But welcome back to the Assembly Call. I'm Galen Clavio. Got Scott Caulfield with me. The normal crew not here. Coach and Andy and Jerod and Ryan.
Takeover alert. Takeover alert.
Half of them have the week off. Coach and Andy did CrimsonCast. You can listen to that coming up this weekend. Reminder, you need to be subscribed to our email newsletter. We send out a weekly IU news roundup, even during the offseason and after every game. We send out a detailed post-game analysis. Just text IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com. That's IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com. It's our favorite time. Scott, it's time for the mailbag. All questions were submitted via our private IU basketball discussion community. That's assemblycall.com/community. And we're always happy to hear from you folks, the listeners, the fans, answer the questions you've got about things going on in IU basketball in general. Let's go ahead and get to some of those now here in this last segment. Let me get this first question. This one's from Chris. What Indiana high school player from the last decade that played elsewhere would you choose to be on the IU's roster? Mine is Gary Harris, who, of course, as most people know, played at Michigan State in 2013. That one was a tough loss for IU basketball and a lot of IU fans in general. Scott, do you have an answer here that you'd like to give?
Yeah, I mean, I want to cheat. I want to go back a little bit farther, and I still want Greg Oden. Like, I want Greg Oden and Mike Conley. I mean, they went to an Ohio State team that wasn't that good. You put the two of them on there, they go to the final game. So I still want to go back and get Greg Oden. That one is just always going to stick with me. That's one of the few times I actually paid attention to recruiting, and then I'm like, all right, I'm done for at least the next 5 years because I got into it like, oh, this guy's awesome. This is going to be awesome. And then it's like, oh, yeah, he's going to Ohio State. Thumbs up. Way to go, OH. I still, I liked Trey Lyles. I thought he could have been a good player. Kyle Guy won a title, so that would have been nice to bring on here too. But no, I mean, for me, Trey Lyles is one that I dug. But yeah, Oden is the one that always sticks with me. I got to say, though, Gary Harris is a good one too. I liked Gary Harris. Thought he would have been good.
I mean, Gary Harris feels like the obvious choice. That talk about a guy that would have filled out that roster in a way that didn't get filled out at the time. You kind of stole the answer I was going to give. For as much as people talked about,
I did give like 12 answers. So.
I know that you really cheated, and I feel cheated now by this whole thing. But Kyle Guy would have been just a tremendous acquisition for IU. Point guard, family, I think, went to IU, and it was very similar, ironically, to your Oden Conley response, and also a couple of other players from that era where they ended up not coming to IU because they didn't like the coaching situation. And that one stung, especially when Kyle Guy goes on and wins a national championship with Virginia. So
that is how you're a champion.
There you go. That's, I think, probably my answer. A
big favorite of the Titus Tate and Titus podcast on the Grantland or the Ringer Network. So
the stealth answer here might be Brian Bowen, because if he ends up coming to IU, maybe college basketball doesn't explode and IU is better and Louisville doesn't get a national championship race. You never know. It's a question that is unanswered. But anyway, let's move on to the next question. This question coming in from Patrick. When a player gets NBA draft feedback, how does that get shared with the coach? Is it directly from the player, or does the NBA provide info to coaches? I'll just take this one, Scott. I'm assuming you mean the college coach here, Patrick. My understanding, you have to understand that college players, when they're getting feedback from the NBA through this process, that's intended for them. Like the college that they go to is to some degree ancillary to the overall process. Obviously, their eligibility is an ancillary, but it's not like the coach says, hey, go get this feedback and we'll give it to you. It goes directly to the player. Now, you can, there's been a lot of articles that have been written about this process, and it gets tweaked a little bit every year in terms of the behind the scenes stuff. There was an interesting interview that I read with Tony Bennett where he was talking about how the process goes and what kind of feedback they're getting. And most college coaches, I think, that are dealing with players that are NBA or at least professional basketball caliber who are getting this feedback, they're not looking at it necessarily as being something that's biased one way or the other or favors one direction or another. It's more like, well, here's an honest appraisal of where you are, where you need to be. And then the player and their advisors end up making a decision based upon that. But from what I understand, it's largely just going through them. Obviously, you're going to have situations where players, if they have a good relationship with their coach, are going to want to cut that person in on it and keep everybody in the loop. I think what you'd find in a lot of cases, a lot of people think this is an adversarial process between the NBA and the college coach and the player. And in a lot of cases, it's a lot more collaborative than you would think. Like there's a lot of positive behind the scenes discussions about what's going to be best for the player, how the things that are being talked about in the feedback are going to be incorporated moving forward. And I think there's also a lot of feedback that's coming from the NBA process that gives the player a better sense. I mean, if you think about the way feedback can flow, what if the feedback comes back and says, well, your game needs to be worked on in X, Y, and Z, and you're not being utilized properly where you're playing? That's probably not going to be fed through the coach. So that's essentially how the process works. I would imagine that's going to get tweaked as we move forward. I think that the NCAA has a vested interest in trying to make this as collaborative as possible. And, I think with this name, image, and likeness stuff that's coming up, it might end up being the case. So we'll see. That'll probably change as it moves forward, but that's where it's at about now.
The only thing I would say with this is I'm watching The Last Dance. I'm sure a lot of people are who's basketball fans. And I do love, I'm sure it's totally true when you see like Dean Smith, who was an assistant at the time at North Carolina, be like, we all knew, after his sophomore year, we told Jordan he should go. Like, if I was ever a coach in that position, that's all if I ever had a player like that, like retroactively, that's all I'd talk about is like, yeah, I coached LeBron. And I mean, I told him he should just get out of high school, go straight to the pros. Like, whether I did it or not, it's great. Like, all these guys, like, I had Tim Duncan, like, yeah, I was his coach at Wake Forest. Like, I told him to go. Like, I no question, you're definitely ready for the pros. Like, and I think I was right. I would just start every conversation with that.
It's a surefire way to look better in the next recruiting process that you go through.
Yeah.
Mark had a question. I'd like to hear you guys kick around the difference between player rankings and coaching assessments. Specifically, look at Trey Galloway. He isn't ranked that highly, isn't crazy athletic, yet all the coaches that recruited him love him, and many think he has a chance to play some as a freshman. Why no love from recruiting services? What do coaches know that recruiting services don't? I wouldn't look at it that way, Mark. Recruiting services are a lot of times they're not necessarily grading players based upon how good of a fit they are for a particular college team or a particular system or even college ball in general. They're generally grading them on the overall basketball effectiveness and quality. And a lot of that comes down to the physical gifts that the player has and the idea of how much more can this player develop, what sort of potential rating does this player have over time. You got countless examples from championship programs of players that weren't that highly rated, ended up being excellent college players, ended up going on to the pros. You've got a lot of players, look at a guy like Ja Morant, who ends up at Murray State, not a highly rated recruit or highly regarded recruit at all, and ends up blowing up and becomes a lottery pick and looks like he's going to have a very long and successful NBA career. The scouts for the recruiting services and the coaches are oftentimes, they all know basketball. They look at basketball in different ways. They're evaluating different things. And every program is going to have different things that they are trying to get into their program. And I think a guy like Trey Galloway, who might have, not the same high-end level of physical gifts that someone else might have, that's where you're going to get some differences of opinion, perhaps in ratings, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to be an excellent college player, and it also doesn't mean that they couldn't eventually be a good pro player. So it's important to keep that in mind. Last question from Patrick. When name, image, and likeness goes into place, should I be concerned that businesses will sponsor bench mobs? While the Knicks English Hut bench mob has a nice ring to it, I'm still scared about all the airtime the 2019 Nebraska bench mob received during our game in Lincoln, and would hate for bench mob activity to be encouraged. Man, well, I mean, if we can't have a video game for college sports because we can't have collective bargaining, I don't know how a bench mob would collectively bargain. But, like, who would be the logical bench mob sponsor for an IU basketball team if such a thing was possible, Scott?
I mean, sadly, it would drive you crazy. It'd be IU Credit Union. They do the song, which I know
no.
drives you bonkers.
No.
I mean, it would be bad. It would end up being like Puccini's, or it'd be a Stromboli, or like, I mean, with the way that unfortunately the advertisers that IU is able to get at Assembly Hall, it probably wouldn't be something we'd all want. It'd be like, hey, brought to you by Smithfield Telephone or something. Who's bringing us your internet tonight?
I kind of it's Xfinity, unfortunately. No, that's funny that the IU Credit Union bench mob. Like, I just imagine the adaptation of the jingle for that, and that would certainly drive me completely.
Yeah, you get deposit slips, you kind of flip them out like you're making it rain.
Every time there's a dunk, like, that's right out. Yeah, it's like just make the deposit. Or
he made a deposit to account. It's not. It's a savings account.
Yeah. There's some tremendously terrible possibilities as far as sponsorship activation with that is concerned. So
let's not do it. Let's not do that.
Like we said, we can't have collective bargaining, so it's not going to happen. But it's a good question, Patrick, and we appreciate all the questions here from everybody.
That's it. We're done. No more questions.
There you go, folks. So that's going to do it for us on this week's episode of The Assembly Call.
Thank you, guys. It's been a delight.
If you want to see us do the show live, join us at Assembly Call on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording. And don't forget to go to assemblycall.com or text IU to 66866 to join our free email newsletter. Special thanks to Bob Thompson for producing a lot of the music that you hear on this show. And thank you all for listening. We've enjoyed it. We've had a blast. We'll talk to you again next Thursday night. Until then,
take it from the green light himself. Keep your elbows in, eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers.
Thank everybody for coming out.
All right, I got to get out of here, folks. Thank you. Perfect. You know, I didn't account for the fact that you have like just a slower delivery than I do, and I'm very like intense because I timed like that entire paragraph is like timed to hit so like the music, you know, crescendos at the right time.
Sorry.
I mean, no, your delivery is great. That is an error of production. I should have thought about that.
I should have adapted. A good performer doesn't allow his own delivery to change things.
So. A good producer puts people in position to succeed. So we'll both just accept blame there. We will both accept blame. But that was good. That was really good.
This was fun. We really enjoyed it.
But now this is where the show really starts, though.
Yeah, no.
As everybody knows on the Assembly Call, the show doesn't start until the 3 segments.
I love the question from Chad. When can we have Scott After Dark? Let's bring it.
Scott After Dark.
When can I start cussing?
Here we go. Yeah, you can start. You can start cussing now. Segment, right? Yeah, you can definitely start cussing now.
It's like lunar bowling, but with Scott Caulfield.
So
that's great.
Okay, so real quick though. Okay, so there's
that
two
was
things.
Subdue Scott, like that was Scott on like morphine. That was Scott definitely subdued.
All right, so there are 2 things I think we should talk about here.
Yeah.
Are either one of you in a big hurry to leave?
No.
No. I mean, if we're in quarantine, man.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Unless you're going to be mean to us and like tell us all the things we screwed up, then yeah, I got to go. But...
No. Okay, so number 1, we should probably talk a little bit about how our 2 shows are going to start working together, which is still, kind of in the early stages. But so the Assembly Call CrimsonCast, we are going to start working together a little bit. Like one tangible way that you will notice this is you guys are going to start posting your podcast episodes on our site. Now, don't worry, like the podcast feeds will stay separate. The shows are going to stay separate. Even though we did this takeover thing, we're not like blending the shows or doing anything like that. But just for logistical and cost-saving reasons, you guys are going to, post your episodes on our site, but keep everything, the same. But, we are going to try and do some stuff together, like what we did with the rewatch series, like what we're doing here, because I think there are, there's some ways that our shows can work together where we maintain the individual character and format and everything of our show, but, just kind of freshen things up, liven things up, do some joint productions. So we're still kind of in the early stages of what this will all look like, but I guess we're kind of terming it a podcast partnership. There are some other things on the business side, like being able to negotiate with advertisers, that kind of thing that we'll be able to do that, the people who listen to the show won't have any idea about. But if you start seeing some of that stuff, that's kind of what's going on behind the scenes, because we've been working together for a while. We have a good working relationship. You guys are like, hey, as long as you keep me away from having to deal with Ryan, we're good to do stuff with you. And we're like, okay, that's fine. He just shows up to do the show anyway.
Our one condition, yes. So
I will say just a little inside baseball for those who are still listening. It's awesome, and we love this, but it's great when Jerod talks about, like, you know, keeping the format of the shows. You know, it was funny, this takeover thing, because for Galen and I to take over, you know, Assembly Call, I have 18 tabs open. I have notes. We have a rundown sheet. We have intros. We have outros. We have drops. For you guys to take over, the producer, for you guys to take over CrimsonCast was, hey, here's an intro. Here's a outro. Talk about whatever the hell you want. And you can cuss. Go for it. It's like, just do it. Like, I mean, here and don't use the music. Like, just whatever you want. Like, talk about whatever you want. Go nuts. Go hog wild. And so, it's funny when you talk about production and format. It's like, our format is we have a song, we have an intro and outro, and the rest is, there you go.
But no, this will be a lot of fun in that we got a lot of things we can do here locally that I think we can take advantage of that'll help both the podcasts, and it'll help you fans out there just with interfacing with what we're doing. We've been fortunate when the Assembly Call guys have come to town, that one show a year in February or what have you, and we'd like that to continue, but we also were hoping to do some more live things ourselves, and certainly through football season as well as basketball season. I mean, we've always been a podcast on CrimsonCast that's tried to do both football and basketball stuff equally, and I think this will just allow us to increase our coverage overall of everything going on with IU sports, and so I'm excited about that.
Yeah, and I will say too, I mean, the partnership, you know, the podcast partnership, our live show this year, you know, Bob Knight didn't come back to Assembly Hall for 20 some odd years. He came back the same time we did the live show together. So, I mean, you know, read into that what you will. I mean, people are listening, people care, and the general took notice. Just saying.
I mean, that is a good point.
There you go.
Facts are facts.
Completely factually accurate.
Every fact there is 100% true.
Now you better get your head out of your ass.
There you go.
Yes. Sorry, Coach. Sorry, Coach.
I'm done.
No, it'll be good. You know, hopefully, you know, I think you guys will be able to do some stuff in the community. Like, I just think it makes some sense. You know, and we've worked well together anyway. So I think it just.
Well, and one of the things Jerod and I talked about when we first broached the topic a couple of months ago was we're podcasters at the end of the day. And I think that it's tough because a lot of what happens in sports media, you're kind of mixing old and new styles of media. And I don't think it necessarily always works that well. Like, I think that Jerod and the crew have done a tremendous job of cultivating a pretty broad audience with the Assembly Call over the course of the last decade. And, you know, our audience has always been smaller. We're a little more esoteric. I think we have certainly a narrower appeal to certain groups of people, but that's been good because from the standpoint of, I think it lends some credibility to what we all do, because we're all stuck in this podcast area. And, you know, we're not doing 7-minute segments for radio that's just nakedly focused on, you know, let's get the audience to hang on for this next segment and then this next segment. Not that I'm saying that anybody would do such a thing, but you know, it does. I think we're on our own media format at this point. I think we need to start capitalizing on it. So I'm just excited about that. It feels like the 21st century has finally arrived when it comes to media, and I'm looking forward to seeing what we can do.
I agree. And look, I think there's a lot more that we can do with community. I think some of the stuff that, you know, some of what we saw with the rewatch series and how many people were there live for those, some of what we've seen doing some of these virtual happy hours, like, I think there's a lot we can do with community. And I think having more of us who were there to host and participate in those things, it's going to make it better. And so that's what, you know, I think you guys view it the same way we do. Like, we're here to have fun. We're here to talk about IU sports. We're also here to serve the audience and give IU fans the kind of content that we would like to listen to, you know? And so I think it'll help us do it better. And so it'll evolve, but we just wanted to let you know that's kind of what's happening. You know, so if you see it, you know, and Scott and I have already, you know, bounced some ideas back and forth about doing some more of these live rewatches, like kind of making it a regular thing. You know, we're probably going to end up having a fight about what the format is, but that's okay. No, I'm just kidding. but it's good. That kind of creative tension is good because we all have different ideas. That makes us better. We all respect each other and we work well together. So it'll all be good. So that's that. There'll be more to come from it. And plus, Coach and Andy get to talk more about football, and that's they're very excited about that.
And please, folks, let us know what you're interested in because we got plenty of room to grow. I mean, we're everybody's busy in one form or another. We all do this essentially as labors of love, but with our powers combined, I think it allows for a lot more fun things to be happening and a lot more ideas to be generated. And we've gotten some great ideas from people that have listened or watched over the course of time. Lisa just mentioned more live rewatches. I know Scott's been talking about that quite a bit. If you haven't been listening to CrimsonCast lately, we've been doing some what I guess I would call culture-based podcasts. We've done 3 food and drink podcasts over the course of the last month. We had a Breaking Away rewatch. I think the time's pretty much come to do a Hoosiers rewatch. So we've got that in the works, and we're trying to figure out the best way to go about that.
We should see if we can get Angelo Pizzo to join us for that.
Oh, I'm sure we could.
I think we could.
Yeah,
if you're listening, sir.
So anything like that, if there's things that you guys are interested in, once we get social distancing in the rearview mirror, we'll probably do another CrimsonCast get together like we had last summer. That was a lot of fun. We'd love to have people back to Bloomington before the seasons start when it's a little bit easier for people to get down here. So, anything along those lines, just let us know. We'll try to make it happen for you.
I've got photos of him in a sombrero.
Sorry, wrong drop. That was hit the wrong one. Sorry.
Ominous.
It happens.
I agree. I think the community is something an area we can really grow. I mean, I think doing the live events is something, Galen and I did it at one point years ago. Like I remember watching an IU Illinois game at Kilroy's. Like we tried to do some live stuff. We weren't able to put it together, but I think, combining this all, we could do some really cool stuff. I know Coach already has a tailgate. I know Galen has a cool tailgate. I'm there for some tailgates, before games. Like I think there's ways we could do combined tailgates. We could do, events together. Like I just think more of that stuff too is good because I think people like, it's nice to kind of mix those two things. And by the way, Chris in the chat, I love it. Like we need to do the Blue
Chris,
Chips
he's been
rewatch.
after that Blue Chips rewatch for literally 8 years.
I have so many thoughts. I got notes. Like, I'm going to do it. It's going to be at least 4.5 hours. It's going to be awesome.
I mean, it's right there in front of you.
Thank you.
We owe it to him.
No, we should do. Tyler said we should do a Romeo Commitment rewatch.
Wow,
that would truly be. If we ever run out of stuff to rewatch and we do that would.
I'm trying to think. I think a Cody Zeller Commitment rewatch? Is there like a raw feed of the video from that? That would be interesting.
That would be good.
If I don't even know how you would do it, they're just like, who's he going to pick? Like, should he pick?
No. Look, I'm going to tell you all right now. If we ever do that, stop us and say and just
too far down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. You have to, guys.
We've really
yes, things have gone bad. Things have definitely
that's
gone
what,
bad.
You need to grab us. Like, all right, go back to Mighty Pumps. That's your limit. Like Mighty Pumps is as far as you can go.
Yes.
Back to Marshall, back to Sky, back to Zuma. Yeah, let's break those down.
Yeah. So the last topic that I did want to talk about some, Galen, because it broke this week, is the name, image, likeness stuff that broke with the NCAA. And we'll have lots more time to talk about it because nothing is quite set in stone yet. And it's weird because, like, I heard a lot of media people, kind of like, hey, I want to give the NCAA credit for getting here. It's like, but wasn't the NCAA like forced kicking and screaming to get here because of laws passed by California and Florida that made them have to do this? And then even what they proposed doesn't even go far enough for what those laws suggested. So, like, can you give us the 5 minutes of what this actually says, what it really means, and then what we need to watch for? Because
yeah, totally. So essentially what the NCAA working group put together was a proposal to allow athletes to profit off of their name, image, and likeness, but within the confines of the collegiate model, which essentially means we want control as the schools over what the people would be, or what the players would be able to do as far as their contracts with name, image, and likeness. And there's some legitimate issues here that, that I think the NCAA is trying to navigate that are a bit tricky. They want to avoid, players being sponsored by an alcohol company or sponsored by tobacco or things like that, things that they would find unsavory. It doesn't stop them from allowing those companies to advertise during March Madness, but that's another story altogether. And then they also essentially want to potentially keep athletes from being able to do their own contracts with shoe companies. That was actually something that was in the California law, but not in the Florida law. And there's a couple of things about this that I think we need to keep in mind. The first is the NCAA didn't do this because they had this sudden change of heart. As Jerod said, they're doing it because they're trying to get ahead of the train that's coming down the tracks, which is all of these different states passing all of these different laws and essentially re-securing the rights of students who happen to be athletes to be able to have control over their intellectual property. That is not the same as like actual reform. It's emergency dressed as reform. One of the aspects that we run into with this also is that this working group essentially straight up asks Congress to give them an antitrust exemption on the federal level that would supersede the state level. So something that Congress could vote on that would essentially say all these state laws regarding name, image, and likeness for college athletes are invalid. The federal statute would take precedence. And it's interesting because a lot of the congressional people that talked about this just shot that idea down immediately and said, no, that's not going to work.
Your lobbying dollars are no good here, NCAA.
Well, I just think they've burned too much capital, and like I had a tweet about this, and I think a lot of people interpret it as being negative. I had a negative reaction to all of these tweets that came out from, especially from media members who should know better, who were like, NCAA to allow players to profit off of name, image, and likeness. Like, guys, how many times do we have to do this? Like, read the fine print. The fine print is always the important thing. And yes, in a few cases, in some limited cases, it would allow that, but it's a very restrictive standard. And look, my perspective on this has always been very straightforward. There's no reason why students, if they are indeed students who happen to be athletes, should have any different rights than another student. And the idea that a scholarship should supersede all of that is, I think, it's bogus. Like from an academic perspective, it's bogus. It is a purely commercial function, which to some degree kind of places the whole concept of amateurism in it makes it look ridiculous because it is under those circumstances. And so the idea that you would be like, well, you can do this, but only under these certain circumstances, I have a problem with that perspective from the NCAA. And I don't think it's going to matter because I think the states are going to look at this and say, yeah, you know what, we're going to keep doing what we're doing because you're not doing what you could do in this matter.
Not to mention, if the NCAA is going to try to regulate this and investigate stuff on a case-by-case basis, look at how hard of a time they had with transfer waivers. You think this is going to be easier and less complicated than transfer waivers? I mean, like that just doesn't that doesn't make any sense at all.
So much of this, and I've talked about this with the NCAA before, there's so much good that can come out of college sports, and there's so much money that can come out of it for everybody if the member schools treat it like what it is, which is a professional league. It is a de facto professional league. It has professional contracts with media companies and advertisers and other sponsors and suppliers. It has commercial contracts with coaches. It just has gotten so used to not paying for its labor that it just hasn't built that into its model. And because their justification for not building into the model is that it's amateur, they refuse to treat it like a professional sport. It's why, I mean, you'll hear people say, well, we need a commissioner for college basketball to advocate for the sport, to help, settle rules disputes, to help settle things like transfer rules and things like that. And you need someone in charge who can watch out for the well-being of the sport. And that goes all the way down to like as many people that criticize referees and, referees working 6 or 7 games a week and just like going from conference to conference because they're all independent contractors and there's no independent standard for the sport as a whole. This is another symptom of that, where because the NCAA won't just do what it should do and treat college basketball as a big business, that we end up with a situation where it ends up being a mess, and it just continues to be a mess and continues to be a mess. And there's still good that comes out of it, but there's a lot of things that could be significantly better.
Yeah. All right. Well, I just wanted to make sure that we address that. There'll be more. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens with it. You're right.
Well,
like you saw a lot of those reactions come out, and it's like, can we slow down just a little bit? And can we,
Well, and the big pressure now, and I think this is the fact that they released that story when they did. I think it's an illustration of the other real problem in college sports right now, which is the tremendous amount of money that's already been lost because of March Madness not happening, because of the other sports for this spring not happening, and the real threat that you're going to have either a delayed or canceled 2020 football season. And, I think they have to find a way to make football work from a financial perspective, because if they don't, it's going to change the face of college sports forever. It just is. I mean, you're going to see schools cutting entire teams. You're going to see, you could see schools dropping down to Division II or Division III level just because they don't have enough money to stay at the Division I level. I mean, it's like financial Armageddon. And I think the schools are kind of feeling the pinch right here, and they're like, well, we got to figure out a way to work things out on this. And it's incremental. It's a good first step, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. It's just a bad time to be negotiating it because there's so much other stuff happening behind the scenes.
I saw President McRobbie issued some different scenarios that could happen. For those who don't know, you're obviously a faculty member. I mean, seems.
My cover is blown.
Yeah. I mean, it does. Like, do you see any scenario where games are played if the students aren't back on campus? Doesn't it seem like that would have to come first? Or
well, yeah, I think it will. It would have to come first. I think that students being on campus is actually not as far-fetched as it seemed even a week or two ago. From this perspective, like I read a lot about the virus. I read a lot about the efforts to try to find a cure for it, and I read a lot about what's going on in terms of public institutions, private institutions trying to figure out how to negotiate this and navigate it. And I think what we're seeing increasingly is a possibility that this is going to be somewhat under control, not totally under control, and it's still going to be dangerous, but it's going to be something where we're going to have to figure out how to operate our traditional sort of process of education and things like that, while also combating the virus simultaneously. And I think the idea that students are going to be back on campus, there are going to be some classes offered in person in a modified format, and then some classes offered online in a modified format. I think that's likely what's going to happen. And under that scenario, I think you can justify playing games. You probably can't have full crowds, and you may not even have crowds in certain circumstances. But I do think that the idea that there's going to, it may not even be like football's supposed to start, September 1st or September 2nd. Mm-hmm. It may be a situation where the season doesn't start until October. The season doesn't start until November. So it might be a situation where the calendar changes. But I do think that it's a better chance now than it was before that the pieces will be in place where games could be played, not just for football, but also for basketball. Basketball might actually be in a little bit rougher shape because of how enclosed the environment is. It's a little bit easier sell when you're out in an open-air stadium versus when you're in an enclosed space.
Scott, do you think the fact that Indiana football was poised to have one of its best seasons ever, coming off an 8-win season, some top 25 buzz, is this the universe just getting off kilter because it doesn't know how to process this that is causing the virus and everything that has happened because of it?
Of course. I actually have thoughts on IU students. In my mind,
you all addressed that way too seriously. That was supposed to be a joke.
No, I know.
Galen's thinking seriously, like this might be the best explanation I've heard for this.
You might be able to time the introduction of the virus to the human race right when Indiana became bowl eligible in early November.
We can make jokes, right? Like we can now make jokes about this. Okay.
No, I do have a thought. Like, in my mind, for other reasons, students have to be back on campus, or else Bloomington's in some major dire straits.
Yes, that's for sure.
But I'll come back to me on that. But no, it's funny. Galen and I talked about this a little bit ago. In an odd way, the things Galen talked about is true. Like, just take Michigan, for example, like another school like Michigan. They are used to getting, what the stat is always, they make, in one game that we make in 1 year. In a weird way, like we are more poised to deal with not having any money than a lot of other schools. There's a weird universe where, IU football has basically made very little money for years, and we've been able to find a way to get by. Like Michigan is kind of the person who's living in the McMansion who can't miss one paycheck or they're going to default on their McMansion. Like we're somebody who's living very modestly in our house, has not as much savings maybe as we need, but we're used to scraping by and eating ramen noodles. So I do wonder if this might be good for us and like it kicks everyone else in the ass, and maybe it's better for us. That's at least the optimistic point. The other point you said is, yes, 1,000% right. This is the universe conspiring against us, and God, I hope Penix doesn't get coronavirus.
It's going to have to be a drop.
Yeah, no, don't.
No, one thing I do want to say, because we have people in our audience that have been really badly affected by this. So it is, we come on here and we talk about the sports element of it, and we're so far into this now. Like sometimes you kind of make jokes about it to deal with it, but I mean, I know. I mean, we have people in our audience that their businesses have been turned upside down, and so
no, and I mean, I had a student who had a parent die from it, and I've had friends whose families have been affected by it. So I'm not taking it lightly. I'm also I don't take even the thought of IU or any school being back in session lightly when it comes to this. But I do think that to some degree this is the new reality. And as much as that sucks to say, I think the social distancing has been really important. I'd like to see it continue until we have a clearer way forward. And I think there's time for that. I think one of the issues that you run into is people want finality. People want certainty. They want to know, okay, this is going to happen for this amount of time. And then at the end of this is going to be what the scenario is. And I think, there's not really a need for that other than our own impatience as human beings. But also I think that, the rush to try to make a decision one way or another ends up being almost more damaging, because then you end up making decisions that are wrong simply out of haste rather than making them out of the abundance of information that you need. And look, I think, IU is doing a better job than Purdue did. Like, Mitch Daniels wanted to get out and make a strong statement. And, Mitch wanted to really, he loves this mantle that he's on of kind of being, the guy that thinks about the dollars and cents of higher education rather than the university aspects of it. And, even his statement about, and I understand why he made the statement, but his statement about, this isn't really, this hardly, it's not fatal for people that are under a certain age. And it's like, well, that's not really true, first of all. But then he's talking about, we're going to have to separate our over 35 students from our under 35 students, and we're going to figure out a way to make this work. And I'm thinking, if it's 35 that's the cutoff, who's going to teach these people? And
how's Evan Boudreau going to play basketball?
Well, that too, yes. But I mean, I'm 40. So theoretically, I'm in the high risk category as a faculty member. I mean, is it just going to be like, well, you're just expected to march in there? And there's a lot of things you have to think about at this level. And I really think our leadership at IU has done a good job of being patient and not rushing to judgment as far as what they're going to do. I know people want finality. They want to know for certain, yes, we're going to have school on this date. This is a time to be flexible. This is something we haven't seen in the United States or in the world for 100 years on this scale. And I think flexibility and being willing to kind of roll with things has a lot of virtues to it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I would say, there's a lot of questions. I look at it from the economic point of view. So for those who don't know, I have a hand in a lot of residential real estate in Bloomington. And that's when I look at, like, you talk about, students coming back. Like, in my mind, students have to come back in the fall, or else the landscape of Bloomington just economically changes differently. I mean, you're going to have, I talked to a couple other people who own a lot of residential real estate. Like, if students aren't back, you're going to have hundreds and hundreds of houses foreclosed upon and not being able to pay mortgages. I mean, I literally had to talk, it's interesting. Everybody got their, you have 60 days delay on your real estate taxes. Most of those people just pay it out of escrow, so it's not a big deal. It just comes out. But if you own rental property, you pay that on your own. And, the Monroe County is reaching out to people, telling them, like, I know the state says you have 60 days, but please pay your real estate taxes on time if you can, or else we're not going to be able to make our budget. And so there is, and so much of Bloomington, I mean, but it's true. Like they had no call in that. And so much of Bloomington, the taxes are not paid in escrow. They're paid, they're owned by people who rent it out to other people. And so I look at that as something where, when people are like, oh, IU's going to go online in the fall, it's like, all right, you do that. Like Bloomington becomes Martinsville, like immediately. Like it's just gone. Like you joke about IU Credit Union, like you're going to have hundreds of houses in foreclosure, and the credit union is not going to be able to figure it out. I mean, it's a different discussion, but it's just like that is the other part that I look at too, just from what I know.
Jerod, you had no idea when this
I know
this partnership happened. You were getting a real estate and business pod to go along with it. So
no, but that's an interesting perspective, because I live in Dallas. I work online. Like this hasn't affected, fortunately my wife, kept her job. So this hasn't affected us, a ton, like in our daily lives. But I'm curious, Scott, and this is probably an impossible question. So if you feel uncomfortable, like answering it, just say so, because it's a tough question, but this is what we do here on AC After Dark. Like, how do you, cause you just expressed a very real, like, hardship that you're going through and could potentially go through if students don't come back. And yet I know that you understand the risks, and you bring all these students from all across the country. Here you go. Now you just make Bloomington another little petri dish for potentially spreading this thing around. How in your head do you balance those two things? Because I know you want students back, and you have there's a specific way that's going to impact you. And yet you don't want to put students more at risk or put the city of Bloomington more at risk. So how are you processing those two different competing thoughts in your head, which have no real answer right now?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And it's, all I can say is just my personal opinions. I speak for myself and no one else, because it seems to be an oddly touchy subject. But I mean, it is, when you hear people talk about it, I think it gets painted too much on one side or the other. People are like, oh, you're picking economics over life. It's like, no, I'm not. Like, I know people who are affected by this. Like, I don't want anyone to pass away. And like, I don't want anyone to get sick. That said, I'm not going to do the number stat thing where it's like this many people die. Like, people get sick. Like, there are people who get sick. It happens. From an economic point of view, this is the first time, again, it's very specific to real estate, but it's been like, I have people who just, they're not paying their rent, and it's like, to Galen's point, it's like, I almost need a finale. Like, I need to know, like, if I'm not going to get rent, or if people in Bloomington aren't going to get rent for 3 months, like, okay, I can budget for that. But like, I may or may not get rent for an indefinite amount of time. Like, that's too many variables for anybody to figure out. And, unfortunately, it's a risk reward thing where I think the risk of not having students in Bloomington is just massive. And it's not an IU or Bloomington thing. It's just a college town thing. Like West Lafayette's in the same boat, Lexington. I mean, any college town, Bloomington is built on IU being, the reason Bloomington is different is because of IU. All the things that are there, like literally, so I've been telling other people is like, if the students don't come back, you won't only have houses out of business. Like half the restaurants that Galen's talking about are just gone. Like they're done. Like there's not enough capacity to keep up with them. Like people aren't going to be able to pay rents. Like you're going to just have a vastly different Bloomington that you're going to come back to in 18 to 24 months. And so that is where I think you have to look at that. I don't know where that balance is. All I will say is this, is that I have a friend here who's an ER doc and works with Indy EMS. And he said one of the best things. So he's obviously I look at it from the economic side. He looks at it from obviously the medical side. The thing that he said that I've been telling everybody, I think is the great way to put it, is he's like, look, to stop something like this, we need to quarantine better than we're doing now. And we need to do it for 18 to 24 months. And those people are 100% right. He's like, now, economically, we need to get back to work in like 2 to 3 weeks. And those people are 100% right. He's like, and that is the problem. Both sides are 100% right. So where you find that balance is where you need smarter people than me to figure it out. And me too. Like, so, but I mean, that's the way I look at it, is like, I think there would be economic catastrophe if IU didn't come back. So much of it's built, so much of Bloomington is built around it. So my biggest fear, honestly, I was talking to my wife about it today, is, now that we're in a quarantine, I would kind of rather just say, look, we're going to keep it closed till like June, but the caveat is then when we reopen, we're reopening. Like, then we're not going to do this again in the fall. Because my biggest fear is that we kind of, it pops up again, and then it's like, all right, we're going to shut it down again. But now I've also been more affected. Like, I have some rental property that may not be able to pay its mortgage, and like I was furloughed. And so I'm looking at it from a different perspective. But it's like, I think those kind of like stops to the economy is not going to be good.
Yeah. Oh.
And he's like, yeah, I'm just talking to his wife.
I'm just
talking to two complete lunatics. He has to turn into Alex Jones radio. Yeah, we're not doing AC radio anymore.
No, look, man, it's like I told you, it was a difficult. I appreciate you addressing that. I mean, just while you were talking, look at all the people in the chat mob, that have lost their job or out of work or dealing with this. I mean, you're right. Like, it's hard because people on both sides make really compelling arguments, and it's tough to know. It's difficult. I wish everybody would listen to each other more and empathize with each other more instead of just, assuming they have the right answer. But, that's the other thing is there is a risk of it getting worse for the fall. Well, and all those things have to be taken into account too, because you don't want to have a false start and then have it be worse after that. And, and it's hard. We're, basketball guys. This was a lot easier when we were talking about Trayce Jackson-Davis. So whoever brought this topic up, don't let them have the mic anymore. But I think
you brought up an interesting and I think really good point, Jerod, which is this, especially the online discourse, is so oriented towards partisanship and blaming somebody for something that's going on. And this is not that type of a situation. Like, the entire situation has been weaponized by people who profit off of argumentation. And that's not what this is about. Yeah. What it's about is there's an unprecedented illness that's causing a lot of people to get sick. In order to try to make things safe, governments have done what they were told to do by medical professionals, which is tell everybody to stay home and try to limit the spread of things. And, none of those things are partisan. Like, none of them at their heart are partisan. They're being turned into partisan things, but at their heart, they are simply actions and reactions to a reality that's out there that humanity has to face. And so, what I try to do with the way I evaluate it and the way I think about it is focus on as much of the demonstrable facts as I can and ignore the partisan aspects of it as much as possible. And look, I understand, people in this environment, it's like we need something to believe in, which a lot of times means we need something to rally against. And I think that's the unfortunate part of it, because what are you rallying against? You're rallying against people who are trying to do the right thing. You're not doing anything positive by turning it into an anger contest. So it'd be nice if everybody could take a step back and think about it more along those lines, but that might be impossible in this environment.
That's probably a good way to close it. I mean, just know, I know there are a lot of you out there that are affected by this, and, we're with you. I mean, in that sense, I think we are all trying to be in this together, and I know a lot of the people that I feel fortunate enough to communicate with are trying to have that empathetic viewpoint and view things from different sides, so we're with you. We're thinking about you. And, we hope that this gets resolved in the best way possible moving forward. If you came to Assembly Call After Dark looking for answers to this, I apologize.
42. The answer's always
That's such a liberal answer. That definitely was generated by
Oh, man. All right. Well, guys, this was great. Thanks for coming and hanging out.
Thanks again. We really appreciate it. Looking forward to it in the future.
Yes. Absolutely. Listen to CrimsonCast this week. Coach and Andy will be on there talking football.
All right.
Okay.
Good stuff. Thanks, everybody.
All right, everybody. We'll see you later.